Today I'm here talking to Uncle Vincent Peters. I'm grateful that he's been able to spend the time with us to share his thoughts with us. Welcome.
Thank you, AJ. It's good to be here.
Are there any significant stories about yourself or your family that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, perhaps about my Aboriginal heritage. Our family, we had 3 generations of family living on Corandurk Mission Station, and my grandmother was born there. My great-grandmother was taken there from her country. She was only a child, and great-grandfather. Both of them were taken from their country and placed on Corandurk. Later they were joined with their mothers. Most of them died there as well. My father was born in Healesville, and unfortunately he was killed on a timber mill at Healesville, just at the end of our street at Ngurai. He was killed when a log rolled off a truck and crushed him. It took him a little while to die. I was just 4 years old. So we had to shift out of Healesville, a place where we'd been for a long time, and we went to live with my grandmother. I think there were good objectives behind the protectorates, but they didn't always stand out. Some of the people managing protectorates didn't really care about the Aboriginal people. But a lot of the people who went there, they were protected in a way because people were being shot. There had been many massacres. They weren't allowed to go onto their own properties anymore. They now had fences. So when you're taken from a country, although you're not in the definition stolen generations, they too were very horrible times. So we lost our culture. We lost our language. They were stolen. They were taken from their families and put on Corandurk. And my great-grandmother, that happened to her, my great-grandmother. And Lizzie Davis is well known, and we all descend from Lizzie and Alfred Davis, who were on Corandurk for many years.
How old were you when you started to explore your Aboriginality?
It wasn't until my middle age that I started to become curious about where I came from. And my wife started to investigate it, do the heritage, and found out more about some of our Aboriginality, but we couldn't find all of the story. I was kind of lucky in a way. I went along to Mullumbulum Indigenous Gathering Place, said to them, I'm trying to find my family and heritage. Have you got any suggestions as to what I might be able to do to find family? And they advised me to go into the Melbourne Museum and have a look at the dhulyarra display. I came across my great-grandmother's picture by accident in the museum, looking at a little girl in a possum skin cloak sitting on her mother's knee. When I first saw that picture, I actually broke down. I had tears rolling down my cheek and my body was shaking. I thought that picture was beautiful. A little girl and her mum holding her, and they had sad faces. What I felt was a bit of shame. A lot of Aboriginal people are made to feel ashamed of who they are. You don't do that on purpose. I was a proud person. But because I had to hide who I was from the public. But I've since found out that, we had men who were leaders and women who were leaders of their tribes. Nothing to be ashamed about that. And when you look at the photos of my family, we had beautiful people, strong people, people who have made it in the world in the sporting arena. So we knew where we were, and we know all the family that came out of that as well. So that helped a lot with figuring my identity. A little while later, we went back to the museum, told them who we were, and then they supplied us with a lot of research that they had been working on for, over 30 years, and another researcher had put some input into it. He was the curator of the museum, Aldo Masolna. So with all that information, we started to find out who we were, and for the first time, where we had come from. And we'd come from the region from Murchison, down to Seymour, out to Violettown, across to Waranga, Rushworth, Mitchellstown, Nagambie, Avenel. They were basically the lands of the Ngurai Illum Wurrung peoples. And we also got a lot of photographs. Unfortunately, Corranderk was a mission station that was always visited by people who were scientists and particularly a lot of photographers. So because of that, we were able to get lots of photo images of our family. But when I did tell people that I had Aboriginal heritage, that could be a problem. You don't notice racism. You can miss out on, it's covert, it happens in the background, so you can miss out on promotions at work, perhaps opportunities. It's very institutionalised but covert. The only time I'd ever experienced any kind of racism was when I told people who I was. Well, looking at me, you could be forgiven for thinking I was a Frenchman. And it's that sense of spirituality, the understanding of how important that is.
So how has history impacted on you and your family?
The impact of history on our families, I think, is huge, but you tended to wipe it off because the white community, as you know, well, they call this land terra nullius. That means nobody owns it, nobody lives there. And of course, Aboriginal people, older history there. So the sensibilities that Aboriginal people have with a continuous culture that long are actually inbuilt. It was then that I actually knew who I was and that my sense of spirituality and connection, all Aboriginal people have it. What history did was get me to ignore that. Because we are brought up in a country where it's only recent where the mainstream population wants to know our stories. They realise the ridiculousness of terra nullius and the effect that it's had on people. We weren't accepted as human. The interesting thing about me and people like me is when you look at me, as I said before, I look more like a Frenchman. So when I stand up and start to talk about our people and our history, they take notice. It's because I actually am very frank with that. I get the skin colour question out of the road right away. Because for me, my Aboriginality comes from my family. And if you trace my family back, you'll get back to full-blooded Aboriginals who have keloids, wear possum skin cloaks, and had their own way of living and culture. What history did was obliterate their cultures. It became illegal to use your native name, and you had to select English names. So people named themselves after the squatters and farmers and settlers that were in their areas. So that's a big change caused by history. We have lived in Melbourne. Well, I'm the 5th generation down from being shifted from Murchison and Avenel to Corranderk, which is near Healesville, and there's 2 generations following me now. So we've been permanently displaced. But we view that country, and I go back and visit it. And fortunately, I've made friends with people from the Historical Society who invite me back every now and again. And they proudly display our family story on the walls of their museum.
Would you like to tell us the story about your great-grandmother?
My great-grandmother had always told the story of what happened to her as a child. It was written down by one of my aunts. It's actually worth a read. And it takes place when my great-grandmother was a child. It's connected to Kellys, the Kelly family, before they became infamous. They were kids. The Kellys had 5 daughters, and their kids used to play with the Aboriginal kids. And this is great-grand's story, which he's passed down. In those days, the troopers used to ride into the camp and bring tobacco, wine and flour for the men. They'd start our men drinking, and when they had them well and truly drunk, and the men asking for more wine, the troopers would start bargaining for a night with their women. The men in their drunken state allowed this to happen, and they belted their wives with a $1 if their wives refused to sleep with the troopers. Granny Davis, as a young girl, used to become very frightened when these parties took place. As the night wore on, The noise was louder and louder, and more wives took a beating. Granny Davis used to sneak quietly away from the camp, and when out of earshot, she would run fast as she could to Kate Kelly's house. Kate was Ned Kelly's sister, and the Kellys at that time lived not far from their camp. Kate Kelly was Granny Davis's friend, and she sneaked back into camp while everyone was fast asleep at daybreak. Well, from that story, it's a shameful story, but it's not our shame. When troopers come in with guns and people are starving and they bargain with food, desperate people do desperate things. That's really a shame story about those times. I'm not ashamed of my family and the women who are getting bashed. I feel sorry for them. Unfortunately, that happened far too many times for our people.
So how do you define Aboriginal culture?
A lot of people, when they're defining Aboriginal culture, they try to define it in pre-colonisation terms. And it is great to know that culture, if you can. Today, a lot of people think about the arts and crafts. But one of the things that I really like to focus on is our spirituality and sense of connection. They are linked with the arts, whether you're a woodcarver, a painter, a storyteller, a singer. All of those things carry with it a sense of spirituality, and you use them to connect with people.
How do you find good leadership in the Aboriginal community?
We are very lucky in the Aboriginal community, as it turns out. When you think we have an elder system, you don't become an elder in the Aboriginal community just because you're old. You actually get selected by the community. It happened to me, and I didn't really accept it at first. It happened to my Auntie Dot and others. When the community start to call you uncle or auntie, realise you've been accepted as a leader.
So what's your opinion on land rights?
I think land rights is an important issue for all Australians, and obviously particular for Aboriginal Australians. We never had land rights due to the idea of terra nullius. It was the authorities of those times called this land, and it allowed them to justify what they did to Aboriginal people in taking their land.
How do you see Australia now?
Australia now is a multicultural country. Australia has always been a multicultural country. With 250 nations here, 230 languages, there are people here from all over the world. What we need to do is to make this country excel, as it always has, at being a multicultural country. Accept each other, share our stories with each other, do it with a smile, and you'll make many friends.
There are a lot of stereotypes about Aboriginal people out there. What's one stereotype that you would like to address?
Well, look at me. I think I am the biggest conundrum in that area for a lot of people. I was able to hide behind my appearance for a long time. And these days, I proudly identify as Aboriginal. I haven't always. I've always known I was Aboriginal, but I didn't identify because of what happened. But I'm grateful for the young people coming up these days, particularly from the mainstream community. They all want to know about the past. They know they can't trust the history books, so they want to get it from real people. So the stereotype that I present is I don't have a black skin. And I've had people come up to me when we've been singing and we've just entertained them for half an hour as an Aboriginal choir and say to me, where's the real Aborigines? And this is where you need to be careful. Realise that is institutionalised racism. They have been taught that Aboriginal people are all black. Don't look at their skin colour. Ask them what their heritage is. Ask them to show you their family history. Ask them about where they came from and what happened to their family. And you will find people standing up for their families because they're no longer content to sit in the background and watch abuses happen to Aboriginal people who still have dark skin.
How hard is it for people to find out information about their family?
For some people it can be very difficult. We were quite fortunate because Corrindurg Mission Station was the closest mission station to Melbourne, and it turns out that the other mission station we were involved in the 1860s and before that in the 1840s was the Central Protectorate, which was at Murchison, and before that it was at Mitchellstown. They were the first protectorates, and the one closest to Melbourne, Corrindurg, was the first protectorate and closest to this region. It turns out there's quite a lot of information for those two stations. But for some stations, they were, depending on where you came from, they were minor and they were a long way from Melbourne. They didn't always get visiting scientists, anthropologists, historians, socialites, even visiting. Photographers in particular took plenty of photographs, so there was a lot of story in mission reports. Some of our story that was supplied to us both from the Murchison Historical Society Museum and the Melbourne Museum was gathered from newspaper stories. So you get dates and they will tell you a fair bit about. Others were gathered through birth, deaths and marriage certificates which were available. Some from the protectorates or from the protectors themselves or the assistants. Augustus Robinson, Albert Lessuif, Robert Brow-Smythe. These people had a lot of our story. And Daniel Matthews of Maloga. But there were lesser known stations that weren't frequently visited by people who could actually record the story. Things you need to be aware if you're looking for your story. Spellings will rarely be right, but read the word out aloud to yourself and notice what it sounds like. The sound is more important than the spelling.
What tip would you give someone who recently found out about their Aboriginality?
All Aboriginal people, and most of people watching this who've got Aboriginal heritage, if you haven't found this out already, try it. When you meet another Aboriginal person, you'll probably ask them, what country are you from? What is your family name? Quite often when you do that, you'll even find somebody who's related to you. And it's that sense of spirituality, the understanding of how important that is, that gives us that sense of connection to each other. And I have found many family.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
That's a big question, AJ. As you heard me mention before, when I retired, I think I probably wanted to do painting and arts and crafts, but now I'm an activist. I do paintings, I tell stories, I sing songs, I go around to schools and tell stories and churches and different municipal organisations. I'm now set in a path that where I feel complete as a person. So I think I'll be doing what I'm doing now, which I never even saw before I retired. Never ever thought I'd ever be an activist. But there's a way of telling the stories, and this is advice for people perhaps looking at this. Always be friendly. Tell your story with an aim to teach. Some things will make you sad, some things will make you angry. It's okay to be sad, but never be angry. If you're trying to build bridges, which we all are, don't put a brick wall between yourself and the person you're talking to. Try to teach them something. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be trying to teach people things, trying to change things from my sphere of contact with people to try and produce a better world for Aboriginal people in Australia.
I'd like to thank you for talking with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, AJ.
And thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a good afternoon.
Thank you.